The voice was sharp, dripping with a mix of sugary condescension and cold authority. "You're going to pay a $10,000 fine for erecting that structure without approval, Mr. Miller." It sliced through the crisp morning air like a blade, and there I stood on my own porch, a cup of coffee turning stone cold in my hand as I locked eyes with the woman standing on my lawn as if it was hers. Karen, the president of the Oakwood Preserve Homeowners Association. She was the embodiment of suburban tyranny, squeezing her too large frame into brightly colored pantsuits, her face always locked in an expression of self-righteous indignation. She wasn't alone. Flanking her were two board members, Carol Pinched and Judgmental, and Bob, the silent, hulking presence I only knew by name. Their clipboards in hand, they stood just beyond the gnarled oak that marked my unofficial property line. A tree older than the state itself, its roots oblivious to the meticulously manicured lawns that stretched out in front of the cookie-cutter homes just beyond. The structure in question. My new smokehouse, a beautiful handmade creation of field stone and cedar that I'd poured my heart and soul into for the last 3 months. It wasn't some cheap metal shack. It was a monument, a tribute to my grandfather who had taught me the slow art of turning tough cuts of meat into something exquisite. Tucked away near the woods at the back of my acre, it was a rustic masterpiece that blended perfectly with the land. But to Karen, it was a violation. An unauthorized, non-compliant rogue building that dared exist without her signature on a form. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice dangerously calm, a skill forged over 20 years in the Army. "I think you're mistaken. You're on my property, and that smokehouse is on my property. It has nothing to do with you or the HOA." Karen let out a sharp laugh that sounded like a startled bird. "Oh, Mr. Miller, your property is part of the Oakwood Preserve community. That makes it our business." She tapped a perfectly manicured nail on her clipboard as she recited Article 7, Section 4 of the Covenants. "It requires pre-approval for any outbuilding over 100 square feet. You never submitted a plan. You never paid the application fee. You're in violation. The fine is $10,000 plus $500 a day until it's removed." I stared at her, the absurdity of it all slowly settling in. $10,000. A fine designed to break me, to force me into compliance. I looked beyond her at the neat rows of identical houses and their identical lawns, at the cookie-cutter existence that had sprung up around my family's land. My great-grandfather staked this claim long before Oakwood Preserve was even an idea on a developer's desk. "Karen," I said, letting her name linger in the air stripped of any polite preface, "this property is not and never has been part of your association. You have no authority here." Her smile faded into cold fury. The velvet glove came off. "We'll see what the county court says about that when we place a lien on your home for failure to pay," she spat. "Your defiance is only going to make this more expensive for you. Remove it or we will." With a dramatic flourish, Karen and her cronies marched back toward their suburban kingdom, leaving the threat hanging in the air like poison. I stood there, my morning shattered, the cold coffee forgotten in my hand. After years of passive-aggressive complaints about my unapproved vegetable garden and non-standard fence, they'd escalated to open war. She thought she could bully me into submission. She thought she held all the cards. What she didn't know was that I was holding an ace, a century-old piece of paper signed by the hand of a president that trumped every one of her petty bylaws. She had just tried to ban my smokehouse on land my family had owned since 1903. She had no idea what kind of fight she'd just picked. If you think that's insane, hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I want to hear your HOA nightmare stories, because what happened next is a masterclass in dismantling a petty tyrant piece by piece. I marched inside the screen door, slamming behind me with a satisfying crack, mirroring the fracture in my composure. Sarah, my wife, was standing at the kitchen island, a concerned expression creasing her brow. She'd seen the HOA caravan pull up and knew exactly what was coming. What did Queen Karen want this time? She asked, her voice tight with frustration. Sarah had been my rock through 3 deployments. She wasn't intimidated by Karen's suburban dictatorship, but even she was growing tired of the harassment. "She wants the smokehouse gone," I said, slamming my mug on the granite countertop, "and $10,000, threatened liens, the whole 9 yards. This wasn't about a building, it was about principle, legacy. This acre of land had been in my family for generations. My great-grandfather, Elias Miller, had come here with nothing but a mule and a dream. By 1903, after years of hard work, he received the land patent. Not just a deed, but a direct grant from the U.S. government, a reward for fulfilling the Homestead Act. The land was his, free and clear. No HOA covenant, no HOA bylaws. The city had grown around us in the late 90s, and developers saw a sea of cookie-cutter houses. But my father refused to sell, no matter how big the offer. "You can't buy a man's soul," he'd told me. "And this land is part of ours." And so Sterling homes built around us, leaving us a sovereign island in the middle of their new neighborhood. The plat map for Oakwood Preserve showed a neat square hole in the middle of Phase 2, labeled as a non-included parcel. When my father passed the title search, confirmed what I already knew, our land was legally distinct. Geographically an Oakwood Preserve property, yes. But legally, not a part of it. The HOA never seemed to grasp that distinction. They'd sent me passive-aggressive letters about my vegetable garden, my work truck, my non-standard fence. I'd ignored them all until now. Now this was war. $10,000 fine, threats of a lien. This wasn't just about a building. This was a declaration of war. "Time to go to the armory," I said, stopping my pacing. Sarah knew exactly what I meant. In the back of my office closet was a footlocker from my great-grandfather's time. Inside was the leather portfolio containing the original land patent number 78432, issued in 1903, under the Homestead Act, signed by a clerk on behalf of Theodore Roosevelt. It was a direct chain of title from the government to my family. Karen had made a mistake. She had underestimated me. What she didn't realize was that she was fighting against over a century of ownership supported by American history and property law. I snapped a high-resolution photo of the patent and the survey map and began formulating a legal strategy. It was time to fight back with the full weight of the law. I wasn't going to shout or throw punches. I was going to bury them in a mountain of their own bureaucracy. The official notice came 3 days later, another finely crafted letter threatening liens, fines, and legal action. But this time I didn't panic. I got to work. My first call was to Dave Jensen, my old Army buddy who'd become a lawyer. He specialized in property law and had a particular disdain for overreaching HOAs. His response was immediate. "Jack, my man, this is the case I've been dreaming of." Dave had a plan. The first step. No more talking to them. Every word from now on would be in writing. We were going to counterattack with precision. I spent the rest of the day drafting my response, a cold, calculated dissection of their false claims. I sent the letter, and the wait began. For 11 days, nothing happened. Then the silence was broken by a community-wide email blast from Karen. In it, she mocked my legal claims, calling them sovereign citizen nonsense. She didn't know it, but she had just walked into my trap. The next phase was to make sure Karen and her cronies were personally on the hook. I launched a website posting public documents from the lawsuit, including the board members' depositions, HOA, financial records, and my land patent. We let the facts speak for themselves. The tension was building, and then the bombshell dropped. Karen and her board had filed a fraudulent lien against my property. I had the evidence. It was time for war. What followed was a battle of legal precision and public pressure. As the public exposure grew, so did the cracks in Karen's facade. Her board members started to desert her one by one as the legal case strengthened. The final straw came when a local reporter ambushed Karen outside a board meeting. It was television gold. Karen's public meltdown aired that night, and the HOA's reputation was in tatters. The pressure on Karen and her board was unbearable. The settlement negotiations began. I laid out my terms: a substantial financial settlement, the removal of the fraudulent lien, a public apology, the resignation of Karen and her board, and an independent audit of HOA finances. They had no choice but to accept. The settlement was signed. Karen and her board were out. The community began to heal. It was a victory, but not just for me, it was for the entire neighborhood. The final moment of satisfaction came as I pulled the first brisket from the smoker. It was perfect, a symbol of the justice I had fought for, smoked slow and low, just like my grandfather's brisket. And as I looked out over my property, I saw it. Karen stripped of her authority, leaving Oakwood Preserve forever. The smokehouse was still standing. The smell of victory filled the air. This wasn't just about a smokehouse, it was about justice, and I had won.